There are over 300,000 traffic signals in the United States alone, and millions more like it across the rest of the world. Every single one of them is running its own small decision-making process dozens of times an hour. This is one of the most consequential machines if you think about it. And what's fascinating is the logistics behind it. The first version of it was made by a man named John Peake Knight, a railway engineer who adapted the same signal system used on trains for city streets. It was installed outside the UK Parliament in London in December 1868. It used a gaslit signal, operated by a police officer who manually turned a lever to switch it between red and green. This first version lasted less than a month before it exploded from a gas leak. It took until 1914 for the idea to actually stick. Cleveland installed the first electric traffic signal, a hand-wired system of red and green lights controlled by an officer sitting in a nearby booth. 6 years later, in Detroit, a police officer named William Potts built the first four-way three-colored signal. That basic three-color design is still, over a century later, essentially unchanged. But what has changed is everything underneath it. A single modern traffic signal now costs somewhere between $250,000 and $400,000 to install at a standard four-way intersection. This includes the controllers, sensors, mast arms, wiring, permitting, and civil work. The United States currently has more than 300,000 intersections controlled by traffic signals. And although we couldn't find a reliable, up-to-date figure for how much the country spends maintaining and operating them today, we do know that back in 2004, the United States was already estimated to be spending around $965 million a year on their maintenance, operations, and improvements. Underneath that century-old three-color design, there are actually three very different ways a traffic signal can be running right now. The simplest is fixed time. The signal just runs on a timer, green for a set number of seconds, then yellow, then red, on a repeating loop, regardless of the number of cars waiting. It's cheap, low maintenance, and predictable, which is why it's still common in small towns and quiet residential intersections. The next step up is actuated. You've probably seen the faint rectangular seams cut into the asphalt near a stop line. That loop is a coil of wire carrying an electrical current, and when a car's metal body sits on top of it, it changes the loop's electromagnetic field. The controller detects that shift and knows a car is waiting, so it can extend or shorten a green light based on who's actually there. Some intersections only put sensors on the smaller side street. The main road stays green by default until cross-traffic shows up. Busier intersections put sensors on every approach, so the whole cycle adjusts in real time. Newer installations are increasingly skipping buried wire loops altogether in favor of cameras and radar mounted above the intersection, which do the same job without cutting into the road. But even a fully actuated signal is still only thinking about one intersection at a time. That's where the next layer comes in. Coordination, better known by its nickname, the green wave. Engineers time a whole sequence of signals along a corridor so that if you're driving at roughly the speed limit, you hit green light after green light without stopping. It sounds simple, but it's a genuinely difficult math problem. The timing that creates a perfect wave for cars heading one direction can create the opposite effect for cars heading the other way. For decades, this was the ceiling. And then AI started getting good enough to blow through that ceiling entirely. The clearest example of what this actually looks like is in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a problem most cities don't. It wasn't built on a grid. Its street network follows 18th century topography, winding around hills, rivers, and valleys instead of following the clean, predictable pattern of a traditional street grid. That made it a strange kind of ideal testing ground, because if adaptive traffic control could work there, it could plausibly work almost anywhere. Starting in 2012, researchers at Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute installed a system called SurTrack, Scalable Urban Traffic Control, at 9 intersections in Pittsburgh's East Liberty neighborhood. The core idea is, instead of a central computer telling every signal what to do, each individual signal runs its own onboard AI. Cameras and radar at the intersection detect approaching clusters of vehicles, and the signal builds its own short-term plan that will move the most traffic through as efficiently as possible. Then it tells its neighbors what it just decided, so the next signal down the road can start planning around it before the cars even arrive. No single brain is in charge. It's a negotiation between dozens of independently thinking traffic lights happening every second across an entire city grid. According to data published by Carnegie Mellon University, travel times were reduced by roughly 25%, a 40% drop in the time cars spent idling at intersections, and around a 21% cut in vehicle emissions along the corridors where it was installed. By 2016, the system had scaled to more than 50 intersections across Pittsburgh, and it's since expanded to Atlanta, Beverly Hills, and beyond. Google took a completely different approach to the same problem. Their program, Project Greenlight, grew out of a 2020 Google research initiative originally exploring climate technologies broadly, and officially launched in 2023. It uses over a decade of anonymized Google Maps driving data to build a model of how traffic actually moves through an intersection without installing a single camera or sensor. The AI analyzes stop-and-go patterns and finds where cars are wasting time. It might recommend keeping a traffic light green for 8 seconds longer during quieter periods, or adjusting 2 nearby lights so they work together instead of making drivers stop twice. The traffic engineer can then make these changes in about 5 minutes, using the same traffic light equipment the city already has. As of the most recent rollout, Greenlight is running in dozens of cities across 4 continents, touching tens of millions of car trips a month, with early data pointing to up to a 30% reduction in stops and up to a 10% cut in intersection emissions. But as impressive as those numbers are, they're still only describing a handful of intersections, running at roughly 70 to 100 plus intersections per major deployment. The US alone has over 300,000 traffic signals. Getting from a few dozen showcase intersections to meaningfully changing traffic for an entire metro area is not a 10x problem, it's closer to a 1000x problem. A 2022 Congressional Budget Office report found that congestion, the actual stop-and-go delay these systems are built to fix, added roughly 0.04 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2019, about 2% of total US transportation-related emissions. The vast majority of transportation emissions simply come from driving at any speed for any reason. Smoothing out red lights helps, but it's optimizing around the edges of a much bigger problem, not solving it. And then there's a phenomenon economists call induced demand. When you make driving through a city faster and less frustrating, more people choose to drive and choose to drive further until the time savings get eaten right back up. A University of Pittsburgh traffic engineer, Alexander Stevanovich, put it this way to Scientific American. Solving urban traffic, he said, is not rocket science, it's more difficult. Because in any given hour, a traffic engineer might be balancing 5 completely different, sometimes contradictory goals at once. This gets even trickier once you remember, apart from cars, a traffic signal has to serve pedestrians and cyclists. The original green wave math already had a dark side. Perfectly time a corridor for northbound traffic, and you can easily make southbound traffic worse. Cars now hit every red light instead of every green one. Add a bus that needs its own priority signal, a school crossing that needs extra pedestrian time, a cyclist lane that needs its own phase entirely, and you've got a genuinely difficult optimization problem where making one group's commute better can make another group's commute, or safety, measurably worse. Pittsburgh's own team recognized this and had to go back and specifically retrofit SurTruck with pedestrian-friendly extensions, giving people crossing on foot more time, even when the AI's pure traffic throughput math would have shortened that window to move cars faster. Every city deploying these systems has had to make an explicit human choice to hold some intersections back from pure efficiency in favor of safety. Considering the US has more than 330,000 traffic signals and spends billions of dollars operating and maintaining this infrastructure, Google's software-only approach starts to look less like a nice-to-have and more like the obvious next move. It can deliver a meaningful chunk of the benefit of a hardware upgrade using infrastructure cities have already paid for, without adding another layer of hardware to install and maintain. That's precisely why Greenlight has expanded fastest in places like Kolkata and Rio de Janeiro, cities with enormous, chronically underfunded traffic networks, where a free software recommendation is a far easier sell to a city budget than a hardware overhaul. SurTruck's model is the opposite bet. Spend more upfront, install real sensors and real onboard intelligence, and get a system that can react to things Google's historical data model never sees, like a broken-down car, a parade, or just an unusually busy day that doesn't match the normal pattern. Neither approach is a perfect system. Both are largely proven on self-reported pilot data, and neither comes close to covering the 300,000 plus signals just in the US. But together, they represent the most significant rethink of how traffic signals make decisions since computers first started coordinating them in the 1980s.